Hello there, welcome to a very special edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We are filming this in the dead of winter, but you probably won't be seeing it until the summertime. That's all part of the plan. The reason that we're doing it now is, well, why not? I have a very special guest. This is my good friend Matt Phillips. You may know him from the Matt and Cate series of videos on YouTube. Look it up. They do some cute videos, very entertaining. So I brought Matt along for this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Actually, I didn't bring him along. We're in his house. Yeah. We're in his home office. Because we musically have a lot of music in common. We have a lot of differing tastes, but one place where it really syncs up, I think we would both agree, all-time favorite album, Def Leppard Hysteria. As far as I'm concerned, as far as melodic rock music goes, doesn't get any better than that. And Hysteria represents a unique time, not only for rock music, but for the music business in general, when you begin to see all of the extra limited edition releases and singles and videos that came out. It's a time when the music industry had money to spend to promote. And I think it was kind of the end of an era, and the ultimate goal of this is something I've been wanting to do since I became a Def Leppard fan when I was 13, 14 years old, and we're going to, by the end of this video, you're going to see the results of that, and we'll explain more about that as it goes on. So, Matt, let's talk about, the Hysteria was released August 3rd, 1987, almost 30 years ago, and still sounds fresh today. I don't think it sounds dated in the least. And I think you probably got into it a little bit before I did. We didn't know each other back then. So, Matt, just explain a little bit your exposure to Def Leppard, how you came to know the band in general, and how this album found its way.
Well, I'm sad to say I actually didn't get into Def Leppard until Love Bites was out, the single. This would be, I'm not sure if it's fall or winter of 1988. So by then the record had been out for almost a year and a half. And for whatever reason, that video and song convinced me to get into the band, and I bought the cassette, and since then it's been my favorite record, and that's never changed.
I got into them a little bit before. My history with Def Leppard, I remember them when Pyromania came out in 1983, because I believe my cousin was way into Def Leppard. And but I was 9 then, so I wasn't likely to get into a hard rock band. Got into Bon Jovi in 86, 87 when Slippery When Wet made it big, so that raised my awareness of bands like that. And yes, Hysteria came out in summer of 87, and it had been 4 years since Pyromania, and back then that was a long time to be out of the spotlight. And anybody watching this, you probably know the various bad things, unfortunate events that happened in between those two albums. I mean, it was life-changing things. But they finally got it together, put the album out, and it was slow to get started. And I remember each of the singles as they were released, but I didn't actually get into the group until Pour Some Sugar on Me came out, probably in the late spring, early summer of 1988, because I'd sworn up and down that I hated this band. I particularly hated Animal, for whatever reason.
Oh.
I don't know why. But when Pour Some Sugar on Me came out, I couldn't really resist. So that was a single prior to Love Bites. Love Bites was fall, 88. And so I got into the band in a big way, and there was a lot to get into. It was more than just the 4 albums they put out to that point. There was a lot of cool stuff that was collectible back then. So it's gone on to become one of the biggest selling albums in history, and in this case, I pretty much agree. It's worth the acclaim that's received over the years. It's also received criticism, but anything that pleases a mass amount of people is bound to have detractors. That's for me. I just don't think it gets much better as far as craftsmanship, and the craftsmanship doesn't just extend the music, it extends to the artwork, it extends to the videos.
Yeah. Actually, for me, it's not only my favorite record, it's my favorite sounding record, it's my favorite album artwork, it features my favorite tour, and we'll talk about some of those pieces and stuff and show you those. Yeah. And then Tim's going to reveal for you something that you might consider the holy grail of collecting for Def Leppard Hysteria fans. So
it's basically something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and finally, just with a little help from eBay, made it happen. So that's kind of the introduction. We're going to move into the album itself, and it's not just a one thing. If you've been watching Tim's Vinyl Confessions, I did an edition on Def Leppard, and it only consisted of the 4 albums that they'd released to that point. So we're not going to go in depth with the vinyl version of the record that much, although we are going to show. Basically, on my side is my collection of Def Leppard stuff directly related to the Hysteria era, and to Matt's left is his collection. We have a lot of things the same, a few things that are different. So let's get started. So these are the editions of the album itself. We come from a generation where we were a little bit beyond, we weren't into buying records at that point. We certainly weren't buying 8-tracks actively at that point. It was the late 80s. Hadn't quite gotten into buying CDs because CDs were...
I didn't buy my first CD until '93.
Now, CDs were really expensive when they first came
25.
out. So we started out buying cassettes. And so this is Hysteria on cassette. This is a Canadian edition on Polygram Records in Canada. It actually has a Vertigo logo on it. If you had bought it in the States, it would be Mercury. It's basically the same company, just a different division. This is, I've seen at least 2 pressings of the Hysteria cassette as a Canadian release. This is the later one. You can't really, probably can't see that from here. This is actually the face,
The black and white.
the mouth on the
cool.
front cover, because you can see where the triangles come down. But there's another one, that the original one of these that I had is just a black cassette with sort of goldish printing on it. And I've spent many a time looking for these credits, because there was a write-up inside of it. You'll recognize this picture right here as being the back cover of the record. This is another thing that got me hooked on a lot of these bands, because it would also list the other albums that they had available. So I said, well, I got to get those too. There's a write-up that basically sums up what they had been doing in the time between Pyromania and Hysteria. And I also found that their liner notes were entertaining to read. Unlike every other band that would just say, well, it was produced here thanks to, special thanks, we play these instruments, and boom. They went in a little bit more in depth. The cassette also had an order form in it for a book written about the band by Rolling Stone writer David Fricke called Animal Instinct. More on that later. So that's the cassette of Hysteria. Now, the reason I started doing a vinyl show is to show off my vinyl, because it's still the ultimate platform for really cool artwork. And here we go. We both have the Hysteria record. These are, I think, identical editions. They're both Canadian editions, and back cover. Just, to me, if I was designing album covers for a rock band, you want something that looks cool. And I just don't think it looks cooler than that. So now, look at the inner sleeve. These will probably be exactly the same as Matt's. These, bigger version of what you saw in the cassette.
Obviously a little easier to read.
Yeah, and the vinyl itself, I showed this on my other episode, is just simply the mouth from the front cover. On this label, it says this side and other side as far as listing the songs on it.
Now,
So-
if I remember correctly, this was one of the longest albums to appear on vinyl, was it not? It was over
Yeah.
60 minutes
It was
long.
about 63 minutes long, and
It was a bit of a stretch for them to get
to press it onto one record
One
rather than
record.
making it as a double album set, which would have been more money and would probably have cut into sales.
Yeah.
Because they weren't coming from a position of, this is going to be an automatic hit. They'd been out of the scene for a long time. It sounds funny now. This is the star-making album for them, but it wasn't a hit right away. Because it was a little different. It really was. I mean, it was a little bit different sounding hard rock album. It was very, almost futuristic sounding. And of course, it came out on CD. And this is the original, there's a Canadian version of the Hysteria CD. There's nothing in here that isn't in the cassette or record, so won't spend a lot of time getting into it. But as with all classic albums, they got the deluxe treatment. Oh, well, Matt's got something cool to show.
Just for fun, I wanted to show you, just to kind of prove that it is actually my favorite record. I had it framed, the CD. It's kind of cool. You've got the dust jacket, or the the
cover of the
cover and the CD. I think our CDs look the same with the silver kind of color, though. Thought that was pretty cool. That's in my office.
And in 2006, so almost 20 years after it originally came out, Universal Music released a deluxe edition. We both own that. It was very cool because, as we will get into, when Def Leppard Hysteria, the album, started to hit, it was just that. It was hit after hit after hit. Of the 12 songs on Hysteria, 7 of them were singles, were released as singles. They all hit the top 100 in Billboard. 6 of them were top 40 singles. 4 of those were top 10. 3 of them were top 5, and 1, Love Bites, went all the way to number 1. So that just does not happen anymore.
This is a rock band trying to compete with, like, on the likes of Michael Jackson. The producer's saying, let's don't just do a good record, let's take it as far as we can go. And why can't a rock band cater to, pop music fans or
the widest possible audience?
Yeah.
Which is, when you consider that the band came out in what is now known as the new wave of British heavy metal, it was quite a stretch. But then again, unlike a lot of those bands, these guys always they always wanted to be a band that played to huge crowds of people and had songs that were anthemic and catchy and easy to remember that people would respond to and sing along to. So, having said that, when you put out that many singles, you don't just put... Back when there were physical singles released to radio stations, there'd be an A-side and a B-side. And the B-side, a lot of times they would just stick another track that was already in existence, a live track or just an album track. But since they released so many singles from Hysteria and they'd written so many songs for it over such a long period of time, they had a backlog of unreleased songs. And it's kind of a particularly British thing, where they put different songs on the B-sides. Mm-hmm. You do that enough times and you collect a lot of them. And the average fan that just goes out and buys the album misses out, unless you're really, blessed with having money to go out and buy all these things. And also, pre-internet, it has to be said, you didn't always know about them. One person would say, hey, have you heard this song or that song? What? What's that? I've got all the albums, I don't know this song. So anyway, this deluxe edition, among other things, collects all of the B-sides. We'll get into the B-sides in more depth when we actually talk about the singles. It also has there are remixes, and that's something else that's different from rock bands. Rock bands didn't do remixes of their songs. They would do remixes that were, I'll give you a good example, the Animal extended version. What is it, 7-8 minutes long?
I love it.
They'll start, they'll sing, and then the music keeps going, and the verse does not come in where you think it's going to. It's I don't know, it basically was made for like dance clubs. And, I guess it worked.
They tried to cater to so many different people.
So Matt just showed you some of the insides of that. I mean, this is a cool shot of the band on... that was another thing about the Hysteria tour, is they, for the first time that a rock band ever did it, I think like Frank Sinatra and people like that did it, but they played on a round stage. They played in the round, which means basically there wasn't a bad seat in the house.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about the round stage, like describe that.
Oh, well, the initial thing is that you notice they've got... the album artwork, which we call kind of like the circuit design, is imprinted on the stage itself, which is so cool.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about some video releases of the In the Round later. But what they ended up doing was recording. They were initially hired, I think it was Wayne Isham, to do some videos. They didn't have such great luck with the Pour Some Sugar on Me video, so they wanted something more entertaining.
The original Pour Some Sugar on Me video was one of the first singles released, but it was only in the UK, and it's just...
hilariously bad video.
It's hilariously bad. And that's the other thing about Def Leppard. A lot of 80s bands, as great as the music is, you watch the videos now and they have not aged well. The Def Leppard videos still have a certain touch of class to them. Yeah, the hair was different and the clothes were a little bit different, but... I don't know, I just always figured there was just a touch of class to everything that they did. And Wayne Isham is still a very popular video director today, even up to the boy band era, like the Backstreet Boys. He would work with groups like that. So, I mean, whenever they hired people, whether it was a producer or an album designer or, probably road crew too, it was the best of the best.
One more thing I want to mention about the deluxe edition. Some people don't realize that Def Leppard, they started to record Hysteria, and it was mostly a completely different collection of songs. You have songs like Ring of Fire and...
I Want to Be Your Hero.
Yeah, so they were originally going to be on the album.
Yeah.
And they have it's kind of a different sound. I don't know if they did those with earlier, like with Jim Steinman or something like that. But
they would have been produced probably some of the first songs written. I know Animal came early on in the writing sessions, but these other songs. And the thing is, these other songs, they're not throwaways. They would have been for any other band. They would have been the top. They would have been okay. That's a single or that's a single. But for Def Leppard, they were just shooting for something more.
Yeah, it was like so. These set of songs are kind of like the Pyromania quality, and they were shooting for even beyond that.
So because Hysteria cast such a it's a cliche, a towering legacy over their career. Even to this day, 2015, you go to see Def Leppard in concert, and I would probably guess that close, if not half, of the set consists of Hysteria songs. And as I said before, simply because half of that album was a bona fide hit single that still gets played on radio today. So when you go to play live, you want to play songs that people know. And they've never really stopped. I'm sure, like most big bands, there are songs that since they came out, they've played at every single concert they've ever played, ever. And so Hysteria is like that. In, I guess it was 2013, they did something, I think, kind of cool, kind of unique for a rock band.
They had a residency at Las Vegas, and it's called The Joint in Las Vegas, and they released Viva Hysteria.
Yes, this came out on Frontiers Records in 2013. Frontiers Records in modern day has become like the home for classic melodic rock bands. And this is, if you can see here, it's got a little bit of the cover art incorporated into the logo here. And the way that they set this up is they played a series of shows, recorded them. This is a 2 CD DVD set, the one that I've got here. Matt has the Blu-ray version. So
that's similar, except that mine comes with the CDs and the Blu-ray disc as well for the live show. And I also actually have, I'll show you, here's just the Blu-ray on its own from the show.
This is the cover of the CD booklet that came with my thing here. Another thing that's very cool about this show is that essentially they ended up opening for themselves. And it's a funny story because the opening act, they called themselves, you can't, unfortunately, you probably can't see it, it's the Def Leppard logo, but it actually says Dead Flatbird.
Dead Flatbird.
And I believe that was a comment that Phil Collin, the lead guitarist, overheard, or his wife overheard, because she's a yoga instructor or a fitness instructor.
Yeah.
And someone says, "Oh, your husband's in a band. Who is it?" "Well, Def Leppard." "Dead Flatbird." And he, not to sound pretentious, but he just couldn't believe that someone had not even at least heard of Def Leppard. So they became their own opening act called Dead Flatbird, and they did a really cool set of songs going all the way back to their beginning. In fact, the opening track in their set is a song called Good Morning Freedom, which, as long as I've been a Def Leppard fan, I don't even have a studio version of. It was the B-side of their very first single called Hello America. I've looked for that single on eBay. It's not cheap.
Good luck.
And they opened, you can get it, but you got to pay for it. And what the set is songs from High and Dry.
A lot of High and Dry.
A lot of High and Dry. Basically side one of High and Dry in one form or another. It's got songs from their very first album, like Wasted and Rock Brigade, which for years they never touched. The On Through the Night album, there's Slang on here, Promises, Undefeated from their Mirror Ball album. And it's basically the songs that aren't likely to show up in a regular Def Leppard set list all in one place. And then, of course, they came out and performed the Hysteria album from start to finish in order, came back out for an encore of Rock of the Ages and Photograph, and basically they documented it all, and that's Viva Hysteria. So that's kind of all the forms of the album itself that we have between the two of us. But there's a lot more to get to. One of the coolest things, again, when I say Def Leppard did things with a touch of class, the idea of bands putting out home videos probably started in the early 80s. I know that Rush put out home videos in the early 80s. A lot of other bands did too. They were really expensive. They probably retailed for something like $60, $70. But by the time, say, bands like Bon Jovi had started to make it big, it wasn't enough just to get the album. The idea of, they put out a home video with all of their videos on it, that was kind of a relatively new thing. But a lot of times they put out one, it would be, I don't know, half an hour long, sometimes even, just come out and have 3 videos on it. Kiss Crazy Nights. But Def Leppard did not do that. In the wake of Hysteria success, which we'll describe how that kind of came together, sometime late summer of '88, I remember this very well, they put this video collection out called Hysteria. This is about 90 minutes long, and it has all of the Def Leppard videos that had come out to date. There's, including, the very first thing on here is Hello America, which is a performance that they recorded for Top of the Pops. But I don't think it actually aired because the single didn't get high enough. I think it had to crack the top 50, but they filmed it. And one of the unique things about it is that
Position of the drummer.
they've got Rick Allen's, he's right up front. So it's a really cool collection of all of their videos that had been done to that point, and some that had never been released before, or at least released in North America, like the UK version of Pour Some Sugar on Me, Too Late for Love, Rock Rock Till You Drop. Those aren't really videos, they were more like soundstage videos, but to have it all in one place, the in-between stuff, it's like silent film with piano music playing, it's very entertaining, and there's backstories behind each video. For instance, I would never have thought to look for this, but in the original Pour Some Sugar on Me video, in some of the crowd shots, they had members of a band that was opening for them at the time called Tesla appear in the crowd. So that's Hysteria.
Just one thing I want to mention, something that they actually don't even show on here. It shows 17 tracks.
Yes, that's right.
There's actually one more. They snuck a little video of Love Bites
Well,
at the end.
probably because the album had taken off, this was probably already in production. So they said, well, we can't not put Love Bites on it. It actually doesn't even have all the Hysteria singles on it because Rocket came out after that. Right. And the version of Armageddon that's on here is slightly different. It's basically the same video. There's a few other edits that came out in that. And so about a year after that, sometime in '89, like late in '89, they came out with this concert video called Live in the Round in Your Face, which is a good document, pretty faithful document of what they would have done on the Hysteria tour. And as I'm looking at this, I'll flip the back cover around here in a second. There's 14 tracks on here. I'm sure they did more songs than that in their concert. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 out of the 14 tracks appear here from Hysteria. It's actually not as much as I would have thought, but they probably did more. But it's mostly, it's all Hysteria and Pyromania, with the exception of Bringing on the Heartbreak from High and Dry, which they actually do a pretty cool acoustic version of it. The late great Steve Clark. That's the back cover. And of course, VHS tapes, well, they've kind of gone by the wayside. Fortunately, Matt, take it.
So they did release in 2001. They collected both of those onto a DVD version, and it's got the exact same running order as everything else, and there's just a plain insert. But there's a few bonus materials. I don't know if you can read this on the back. What they've also added are some videos that they put out
since.
We're talking about Slang, All I Want Is Everything, Goodbye, so stuff essentially from the
Slang
and
Slang
video.
Euphoria. Euphoria, by the way, is their album that came out in 1999. That's where this shirt comes from, because we saw them right here in Fredericton at the Aitken Center, and poor Joe lost his voice. We won't talk about that. It was still a good show. That's the thing. I mean, even when they aren't running at 100%, they're all so talented in this band. Phil Collins could probably carry a show, singing lead if he had to. Probably wouldn't want to.
In kind of the same way, for me, it's like the Bon Jovi, Richie Sambora and John Bon Jovi, where you've got the lead singer, but then also the guitar player is not too shabby.
Who sings sometimes better than the singer itself. Yeah. That's another story. So the only other video that we've got, we have it in different forms here.
I had forgotten that you have the VHS version of this.
Yeah, it's classic albums. There's a great series that's done out of the UK. I've seen quite a few of these. Metallica's Black Album, Rush 2112 Moving Pictures. They take classic albums and basically go into the studio where they were recorded, talk to the members of the group, the producer, anyone that was involved in it, and basically go behind the scenes as to the making of this album. And as much as I knew about Def Leppard, I learned a lot from this video. And actually the DVD has more material on it than the video does.
There's a few extended interviews and that sort of
some
thing.
acoustic performances. But it's, boy, you know, anyone that detracts Def Leppard for, you could say that they're overtly commercial or whatever you want to say about them. You cannot say they do not know how to compose songs and play songs, because these songs, it may sound very effortless to listen to coming off the radio. There's a lot that goes into them, and we both attempted to play these songs on guitar. There's so many different little things you don't even notice, but if it's not there, you do notice. It's a very subtle thing, and that was, you know, one of the things I learned from that. The Gods of War, for instance, I didn't know it was all that.
Just 3 or 4 different guitar parts
at the same time, but it doesn't sound cluttered. It sounds very natural. Matt's got a couple things here that I don't have. As I mentioned earlier, they released 7 singles. This was the final single to be released from an album that came out in August of '87. It was spring '89 before Rocket was released. And by this time they had started producing CD singles. What this has on it is it's a live version of Women. It's a really cool medley that they do, Rock of Ages, and in the middle of it they do songs like Come Together by the Beatles, Whole Lotta Love, Led Zeppelin, Not Fade Away by the Rolling Stones, Radar Love, Golden Earring, and it's the lunar mix of Rocket, which is the same as the video, which is a little bit shorter and a little bit different than the album version. Also different artwork.
Yeah.
Then you can tell, though, if you look at it, it's still got that triangle thing happening, and I didn't notice that for a long time. So that's the CD single to Rocket. I don't have anything like that. When I held up the cassette back at the beginning of this, I said there was an order form for a book. Matt's got that book. Now, I don't think you ordered this right away. I think you got this many years after that.
I've had it for about 15 years, and again, you know, found it on eBay. It's one of the first things I had ever bought on eBay. It's in really good condition. It's a great book. You said it's put out by David Fricke. I thought it was David Frick, so I learned something today.
Well, I could be wrong. I could be wrong about that.
He's a senior editor at Rolling Stone. I'm not sure what position he was then.
Watch any rock documentary, just about, and he's on there.
So I just want to take really good care of the book, but there's all kinds of information in this book about the 3 years between Pyromania and Hysteria being released.
And for those of you that don't know, I mean, just to sum it up, I mean, the most devastating thing that happened is that New Year's Eve 1984, Rick Allen was in a car accident and lost his left arm. Rick Allen's the drummer, folks.
Yeah, there's right.
Most any other rock band, the drummer loses his arm, they would say, well, sorry, but we have to move on. And they did not do that. They were loyal, and they said...
Very first part of the book. So.
Yeah. They said, let's figure out a way that, you know, let's let him at least try. And, of course, he developed a special kit and a way to play things with his left foot that he would have played with his left arm. And it's amazing to watch what he does on the drums, because it really doesn't sound all that different. It's a pretty amazing thing. It's pretty amazing when you think about it now, how bands change members. It takes a lot for Def Leppard to have gotten rid of someone. There's been very few lineup changes. You know, of course, the tragic...
Certainly not intentionally.
No, I mean, you know, their early lead guitarist, Pete Willis, they had to let him go, and very sadly and ironically, for the same reasons that ultimately Steve Clark lost his life in the early 90s, way too soon. But they haven't had any lineup changes since then. They got Vivian Campbell in the band, and they're the same five guys you see in 2015 that you would have seen in 1992. So that's Animal Instinct, which I don't have a copy of that either. So now we kind of get to the purpose of doing this special episode. We are celebrating the anniversary of the Hysteria album, but one of the cool things that came with it was all of the singles that they released. And singles, When rock bands release singles, a lot of times they would just come out in a plastic sleeve or a generic sleeve with whatever label this band was on. But sometimes they got a little bit fancier, and Def Leppard definitely put them in the fancier category. As I said, they ended up releasing 7 singles from Hysteria, and I'm thinking that there must have been a long-term plan set right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. They were probably taking a chance on this album hitting big, which it ended up doing. It took a while, but it ended up hitting big. And basically, like, what's the best way you could describe what they ended up doing with the single art?
Well, they've taken the album artwork, which I don't know if we mentioned was designed by Andy Airfix at Satori.
Yes.
A graphic designer. And they broke up that brilliant design into basically like 9 quadrants. So if you were to think about, let's look at the album.
We'll put the vinyl version out again. So take a good look at this. They basically broke it up. If you think of this, say, like a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way of...
They made it into 9 equal squares. And so that each single would form a corner of... So yeah, let's get started with the singles then.
So the first one,
this came out...
Women. See if you can spot where that comes
This
from.
came out at the same time the album did, maybe a couple weeks in advance. This forms the upper right corner of the Hysteria sleeve. So basically, it's what I'm doing is I'm assembling a collage of these singles, forming a giant version of the Hysteria cover. And so this is the first single, Women. It was not successful. I think it peaked at number 80, and it was only the first single in North America. The next song I'm going to talk about, Animal, was the first single everywhere else, and it actually did connect. It was actually their first UK top 10. So the back cover of the Women single is a cool picture of the band. And right away, we're getting into songs that aren't on the album. The B-side of Women is a sort of a simple little fun rock song called Tear It Down, which they ended up re-recording slightly and sticking on the end of the Adrenalize album, which would be their next album 5 years later. So that's the Women single, one corner. Next up, Animal. Really easy to spot this one. This is the center of the Hysteria cover. This was the second single released in North America, ended up getting to number 19. It was actually a top 10 single in the UK. Back cover, this is a very familiar shot of the band from the time, publicity photo of them outside in a desert somewhere. And the B-side of this single is a song called I Want to Be Your Hero, which is one of the more melodic songs that they had written of the early sessions. In another a parachute in the middle of another album, it could have been a single. Third one, this one is my favorite. I've had to resort to eBay to buying these singles, but third single was the title song, the title track, Mysteria, which did become a top 10 hit. And this is not just, I'll show you the back cover, this is a Canadian issue actually. Shots of the band on stage, little picture of the album cover on the bottom corner. This is actually a poster bag. This is a sticker right on deluxe edition poster bag, which means it folds out. Hopefully I'll hold this up at a good angle. So there you go, just a triangular logo, but on the back, it's the band in their prime, right there. So yeah, it's a poster sleeve. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to be using this, so it's not going to end up as a poster, but so that's Hysteria. The song that changed everything for Def Leppard, changed the fortune of this album and made it go from an album that sold 3 million copies, but believe it or not, did not sell enough copies to break even with the money spent on all the studio time and the recording of Hysteria. Still hadn't topped the sales of its predecessor, Pyromania. But that all changed with the release of Pour Some Sugar on Me. This song, for whatever reason, just connected in a big way, went all the way to number 2. I'd like to know, I don't know what kept it out of the top spot. It was probably, that doesn't matter. Something kept it out of the top spot in the States. Pour Some Sugar on Me was for a second single, I think, in the UK, which is when they did that really horrible video. B-side of Pour Some Sugar on Me is a little bit of a heavier song from these sessions called Ring of Fire. And again, reminding you where this came from, where to go buy it. This forms the bottom middle of the cover. The #1 single, Love Bites, as Matt mentioned, this was the song that introduced him into Def Leppard fandom. The other thing I like about it, it's not just a straight corner of the album. The title is all written in really specialized print. It incorporates the same sort of thematic elements that made up the album cover, but made it its own thing.
There's some great graphic design going on there.
Yeah, the B-side of this one was not a new song. It's a live version of Billy's Got a Gun, which is the closing track on Pyromania. Next up, the believe it or not, sixth single from Hysteria, Armageddon It. This is this over here, part of the album. The B-side of this is not an original single, nor is it a live version. It is very much meant to be tongue-in-cheek. It's a cover of the old R&B standard Release Me, with vocals by a guy who I believe is still on the road crew now, whose name is, why can't I think of his real name? Stumpus Maximus is his stage name. But inside Malvin Mortimer, thank you. And I've got a picture of him with his little top hat with the band in the background. So the B-side's not actually by Def Leppard. It's performed and produced by Stumpus Maximus and the Good Old Boys. Now, this is a write-up from, I believe, Joe Elliott. Rarely in my travels have I come across such a monumental talent as Stumpus Maximus. Stumpus comes from strong Welsh singing stock and, in fact, is the brother of the legendary Morty of 70s sensation racing cars. Anyway, we ditched his backing group and formed the Good Old Boys just for the occasion. In case you wanted to know, I willingly gave up the mic just to play piano. Hope you all enjoy it. Rock on, Stumpus. His singing is utterly unique. Singing beauty. So you saw the Rocket CD single and how it differed from the rest of the album. There actually was a single that came out when it was in its standard release, and it forms this bottom corner here. And like I said, this is January 1989. It's got the same write-up that's inside the CD. It says also available on cassette single and CD3. B-side of this is a live version of Women, the same version of Women that appears on Live and the Round in Your Face. That's exactly where it comes from. This actually came out prior to that. So here we have a situation where we've got 7 singles released, but there are 9 squares to fill, which leads us, the problem of what do you fill the squares with. And like I said, this would never happen now because, the music business is so much different. Also, everything's digital. You don't get things to hold in your hands. But there were artwork done for those 2 remaining singles, which are Here and Up Here. No, Up Here. And I believe they were going to be Excitable and Love and Affection. And I think now, they should have just gone for it.
And went for
because
set a precedent.
There would never be an opportunity. I mean, every band has their peak, and for Def Leppard, that was it. They were the biggest band in the world, probably at that point when Hysteria was at its peak. So I wish now that they'd just done it, so that I wouldn't have had to scramble around wondering, well, how am I going to fill in those spaces? What I ended up doing, some may have done it differently, I got a second version of Love Bites because the corners aren't really all that different. So I think we can get by with having another Love Bites in the corner. And for the bottom corner, I bought another single of Women, and I'm going to turn it upside down, and as you'll see when it's together, these lines more or less sort of sync up. So the frame I bought leaves a little bit of space at the bottom. Basically what I'm going to do, I just grabbed some other things. So what else can I get to fill in the space? Just because it's one of my all-time favorite songs, and I love the picture sleeve with Marilyn Monroe on it. This is a little bit beat up, but this was the picture sleeve to Photograph from Pyromania. For those that are curious, the B-side was Action Not Words. They hadn't quite gotten into, they'd done a few B-sides to that point. They'd done Me and My Wine and Good Morning Freedom, but it wasn't a full-time thing. And this is the Australian single to Rocket, which has the same cover as Matt's CD single. This one actually has a different B-side. This actually has Release Me on the B-side. So I thought we'd pick this up just for the heck of it. Unusual for a single, at least unusual in North America. It had a small hole. It didn't have the large hole that you usually have to have the adapter for it. And I just poked around on eBay just to find out something else to fill up the space. And I don't know if these are officially released or not, but I think it's kind of neat. This is a magnet that someone put together with all of the... It doesn't have like Vault or any of their compilations, but it's got all their studio albums up to and including Viva Hysteria. So that's basically, we're going to assemble this single collage and show it to you. Hope you're enjoying this show. This is something that, you know, if I'd had the foresight to do, I would have ended up spending much less money putting these singles together. But also, I never saw them. I used to have the singles to Hysteria and Pour Some Sugar on Me, which I bought to have the B-sides on them. I think I bought them here in Freshman at Sam the Record Man. But they just had standard white polygram sleeves on them. So I never had any of the picture sleeves. I never saw them in stores, but again, pre-internet. We weren't particularly blessed to live in an area where you had access to the extra stuff. So that's probably the end of this portion. Hopefully, in just a few seconds, you will see the finished product. As you can see, it didn't happen right away, but this is the finished collage, which I'm very, very happy with. Like I said, this is something that will probably never happen again in music, that have the ability to put a bigger version of a record cover together, each with the individual song titles. Had to put a lot of work into it. Down at the bottom, we put the single for the title song itself. So just basically, that's, you know, I'm 40 and I still think that's the coolest looking thing I've ever seen. Appreciate you tuning in to watch this very special edition of Tim's Final Confession. Thanks to my good friend Matt for sitting in on this one and taking care of all the editing. Two big Def Leppard fans here. We hope you enjoyed watching. Stay tuned for more episodes. And yeah, have a good look at this collage here. This is my Hysteria singles collage, minus the two other squares, but I think we got around it quite well. We've got a nice little thing happening there with the that bottom corner, kind of like a trapezoid type of thing if you turn it a certain way. Thank you for watching, and if you just discovered Tim's Final Confessions, lots of other videos for you to get caught up on YouTube and Facebook.